To the river. It was raining when we woke, and the mountains were obscured by a heavy mist. We delayed our departure, playing football on the veranda with one of the pumpkins that had fallen off the roof. At noon, the rain stopped and the sun shone through the clouds. As the mist lifted, we saw the snow range, the great peaks of Nandakot and Trishul stepping into the sky. "It's different up here," said Kamal. "I feel a different person." "That's the altitude," I said. "As we go higher, we'll get lighter in the head." "Anil is light in the head already," said Kamal. "I hope the altitude isn't too much for him." "If you two are going to be witty," said Anil, "I shall go off with Bisnu and you'll have to find the way yourselves." Bisnu grinned at each of us in turn to show us that he wasn't taking sides, and after a breakfast of boiled eggs, we set off on our trek to the next bungalow. Rain had made the ground slippery and we were soon ankle deep in slush. Our next bungalow lay in a narrow valley on the banks of the rushing Pindar River, which twisted its way through the mountains. We were not sure how far we had to go, but nobody seemed to be in a hurry. On an impulse, I decided to hurry on ahead of the others. I wanted to be waiting for them at the river. The path dropped steeply, then rose and went round a big mountain. I met a woodcutter and asked him how far it was to the river. He was a short, stocky man with gnarled hands and a weathered face. 7 miles, he said. "Are you alone?" "No, the others are following, but I cannot wait for them. If you meet them, tell them I'll be waiting at the river." The path descended steeply now, and I had to run a little. It was a dizzy, winding path. The hillside was covered with lush green ferns, and in trees, unseen birds sang loudly. Soon I was in the valley, and the path straightened out. A girl was coming from the opposite direction. She held a long, curved knife with which she had been cutting grass and fodder. There were rings in her nose and ears, and her arms were covered with heavy bangles. The bangles made music when she moved
"How
her
far
hands.
is it to the river?"
It was as though her
asked.
hands spoke a language
The girl had
of their
probably
own.
never been near the river, or she may have been thinking of another one, because she replied 20 miles without any hesitation. I laughed and ran down the path. A parrot screeched suddenly, flew low over my head, a flash of blue and green, and took the course of the path while I followed its dipping flight, until the path rose and the bird disappeared into the trees. A trickle of water came from the hillside, and I stopped to drink. The water was cold and sharp and very refreshing. I had walked alone for nearly an hour. Presently, I saw a boy ahead of me, driving a few goats along the path. "How far is it to the river?" I asked, when I caught up with him. The boy said, "Oh, not far, just round the next hill." As I was hungry, I produced some dry bread from my pocket and, breaking it into two, offered half to the boy. We sat on the grassy hillside and ate in silence. Then we walked in together and began talking and talking. I did not notice the smarting of my feet and the distance I had covered. But after some time, the boy had to diverge along another path, and I was once more on my own. I missed the village boy. I looked up and down the path, but I could see no one, no sign of Anil and Kamal and Bisnu. and the river was not in sight either. I began to feel discouraged, but I couldn't turn back. I was determined to be at the river before the others. And so I walked on, along the muddy path, past terraced fields and small stone houses until there were no more fields and houses, only forest and sun and silence. The silence was impressive and a little frightening. It was different from the silence of a room or an empty street. Nor was there any movement except for the bending of grass beneath my feet and the circling of a hawk high above the fir trees. And then, as I rounded a sharp bend, the silence broke into sound. The sound of the river. Far down in the valley, the river tumbled over itself in its impatience to reach the plains. I began to run, slipped and stumbled, but continued running. And the water was blue and white and wonderful. When Anil, Kamal and Vishnu arrived, the four of us bravely decided to bathe in the little river. The late afternoon sun was still warm, but the water, so clear and inviting, proved to be ice cold. Only 20 miles upstream, the river emerged as a little trickle from the glacier, and in its swift descent down the mountain slopes did not give the sun a chance to penetrate its waters. But we were determined to bathe, to wash away the dust and sweat of our 2 days' trudging, and we leapt about in the shallows like startled porpoises, slapping water on each other and gasping with the shock of each immersion. Vishnu, more accustomed to mountain streams than ourselves, ventured across in an attempt to catch an otter, but wasn't fast enough. Then we were on the springy grass, wrestling each other in order to get warm. The bungalow stood on a ledge just above the river, and the sound of the water rushing down the mountain defile could be heard at all times. The sound of the birds, which we had grown used to, was drowned by the sound of the water. But the birds themselves could be seen, many colored, standing out splendidly against the dark green forest foliage. The red-crowned jay, the paradise flycatcher, the purple whistling thrush, and others that we could not recognize. Higher up the mountain, above some terraced land where oats and barley were grown, stood a small cluster of huts. This, we were told by the watchman, was the last village on the way to the glacier. It was, in fact, one of the last villages in India, because if we crossed the difficult passes beyond the glacier, we would find ourselves in Tibet. We told the watchman we would be quite satisfied if we reached the glacier. Then Anil made the mistake of mentioning the abominable snowman, of whom we had been reading in the papers. The people of Nepal believe in the existence of the snowman, and our watchman was a Nepali. Yes, I've seen the Yeti, he told us, a great, shaggy, flat-footed creature. In winter, where it snows heavily, he passes by the bungalow at night. I have seen his tracks the next morning. Does he come this way in summer? I asked anxiously. We were sitting before another of Vishnu's fires, drinking tea with condensed milk, and trying to get through a black, sticky sweet which the watchman had produced from his tin trunk. The Yeti doesn't come here in summer, said the old man. But I have seen the Lidini sometimes. You have to be careful of her. What is a Lidini? Asked Kamal. Ah, said the watchman mysteriously. You have heard of the abominable snowman, no doubt. But there are a few who have heard of the abominable snow woman. And yet she is far more dangerous of the two. What is she like?
asked Anil, and we all craned forward. She is of the same height as the Yeti, about 7 feet, when her back is straight, and her hair is much longer. She has very long teeth and nails. Her feet face inwards, but she can run very fast, especially downhill. If you see a Lidini and she chases you, always run uphill. She tires quickly because of her feet. But when running downhill, she has no trouble at all, and you have to be very fast to escape her. Well, we are all good runners, said Anil with a nervous laugh. But it's just a fairy story, I don't believe a word of it. But you must believe fairy stories, I said, remembering a performance of Peter Pan in London, when those in the audience who believed in fairies were asked to clap their hands in order to save Tinker Bell's life. Even if they aren't true, I added, deciding there was a world of difference between Tinker Bell and the abominable snow woman. Well, I don't believe there's a snowman or a snow woman, declared Anil. The watchman was most offended and refused to tell us anything about the Sagpa and Sagpani. But Bisnu knew about them, and later, when we were in bed, he told us that they were similar to snowmen, but much smaller. Their favorite pastime was to sleep, and they became very annoyed if anyone woke them up, and became ferocious, and did not give one much time to start running uphill. The Sagpa and Sagpani sometimes kidnapped small children and, taking them to their cave, would look after the children very carefully, feeding them on fruit, honey, rice and earthworms. When the Sagpa isn't looking, he said, you can throw the earthworms over your shoulder.